Welcome back to my second part of looking back at how Warlords of Draenor changed World of Warcraft as a whole. There is a part 1 that will cover a bunch of stuff I'll miss out here. I would recommend checking that out first so you know how we've reached up to this point. I will link it below. Let's get straight back into it with the PvE scene. Well, there wasn't really that much of it to speak about overall. Warlords of Draenor had the least PvE content of any expansion, as well just the least content overall, I suppose. Not exactly something you want to aim for. The opening raid was Highmaul, and this was also the introduction of a mythic raiding, a new raiding mode which was designed around only ever bringing 20 players along to a raid. This format would prove to be the one that would stick, as it's still employed today. The goal of changing the hardest raid difficulty to only fit one size, so that Blizzard can design mechanics and damage specifically around that number of players, instead of not only having to make great bosses, but to ensure they had to fit into both 10 and 25 man, was finally gone as a challenge. I'd say the design philosophy behind Mythic has been overwhelmingly successful, and a great positive that Warlords of Draenor gave us. But on to Highmaul, I remember two things from the world first race here. Paragon's decision to skip the Butcher, who could be done as early as the second boss in the instance I believe, to go straight for the last boss, Imperator Margok, which ended up being the strategy that brought them home the win overall. Many other guilds vying for the world first place were hung up on taking down the Butcher, who was essentially a DPS check for the raid but was extremely tightly tuned to be killed this early on in the expansion. The second big memorable moment was the enhancement Shaman in Paragon's roster for the world first Margok kill. This must have made a lot of players want to re-roll a class that was there for a very niche purpose. See, in the mythic phase of Margok, we get a visit from our old pal Cho'Gall. Crazy as ever, he spawns a lot of ads, like a whole lot of ads. Enhancement had Unleash Flame to increase the damage of your next fire attack into a flame shock, Lava Lash to spread that shock to all nearby enemies, and then spam Fire Nova, which would proc an AoE off every single target with flame shock. More targets, more damage. This made Enhancement the ideal specialization to tech into their kill, and well, you can see the results for yourself here. The next tier was Blackrock Foundry, which came only a couple of months after Highmaul. Once again, a very good tier. Many people rate Blackhand up there in terms of one of the best end bosses for a raid ever. This place was another serious challenge on Mythic 2, proving that the new formula was holding true. It also had some fantastically designed encounters. Who can forget Operator Thogar, aka the train boss? Brilliant. Hans and Franz with the Pop-Tarts and Slammers, Blast Furnace being a literal marathon of a fight on Mythic, Gruul making a reappearance, and Iron Maidens with their varying mechanics and ship that you had to hop between. This raid was very impressive. Whatever else may have been going on outside the raiding team, these guys ever barely get it wrong, and Blackrock Foundry was no exception. Blackhand lived for a total of 10 days on Mythic difficulty. Tier 17 was Hellfire Citadel, the culmination of the expansion, where by this point the focus had moved from solely the Iron Horde to stopping Gul'dan from pretty much destroying the world. Usual stuff, really. Once again, this place had some certainly memorable encounters. Iron Reaver, a big mech essentially. I remember enjoying the Kilrog Deadeye fight as well. Many Mythic guilds hit a big wall on Gorefiend with its numerous mechanics that you had to manage inside and outside of, well, himself really. Socrafar was an interesting one, where your success or failure could be more or less pinned onto the one guy controlling the mech throughout the fight. Manaroth was resurrected and then swiftly taken down again just beyond the first reset, and as for the final boss, Archimonde would prove more of a challenge. He was the first boss to live past the second reset and was downed on day 16. Now, apart from just being a multi-phase, very long, full of one-shot, you can't make any mistakes for around 15 minutes kind of fight, it had this wonderful little mechanic called Wrought Chaos and Focus Chaos. This would link you with another party member. After a few seconds, a beam would fire from you to them. This happened 3 times in a row. You couldn't prepare for it or call tactics on it because it was random and affected everybody. You overlap 2 beams, someone's gonna die from that. It had to be perfect every single time. Even as the best raiding team in the world, this sort of wasn't really possible until an add-on was developed to show the beam paths. And this would be quite a talking point moving forwards, that Blizzard were making bosses that sort of required add-ons just to not feel frustrating. And we'll see more of this in Legion and how Blizzard clamped down on it. I'd say for the first expansion to have Mythic that it was really good. I just wish there was more of it, to be honest. I mean, Cataclysm launched with Blackwing Descent, Bastion of Twilight, and Throne of the Four Winds. Mr. Pandaria had Terrace of Endless Springs, Heart of Fear, and Mogashan Vaults. And expansions before that equally had 3 raids, even small raids like Gruul and McTheridan's Lair. Warlords of Draenor launched with 1 and had 3 total. As for dungeons, well, to be honest, I don't really have anything much to say. Sure, there were some nice ones, and we still still had our challenge mode that carried over from Mists of Pandaria, but just for a few throwbacks. We can't forget about the good old train dungeon, aka Grimrail Depot. Revamped Alkindun was okay, didn't like how you had to go back and forth too much there. Upper Blackrock Spire got a revamp as a whole. I remember Shadowmoon Burial Grounds being quite cool thematically as well. What you did need to get, however, was silver with the Proving Grounds in order to enter heroic dungeons. Some people really lost it at doing this, or that Blizzard should put a barrier to entry between them and content. For veteran players, silver was an absolute joke. For some of the newer guys, it might have been a bit more of a roadblock than you'd expect. It was kind of annoying to redo on each character and specialization though, to be fair. Blizzard didn't bother with this moving forwards into Legion, and to be honest with Warlords of Draenor Heroic, well, it was hardly rocket science anyway once you had a reasonable understanding of the dungeons. As for other features, ground clutter was turned down in raids, so being in melee didn't look like you had a disco ball flashing on your screen anymore, which was great. Collection logs were added for heirlooms and toys, as well as more void storage. This was sorely needed after the metric ton of new toys and items that we got in Mists of Pandaria. The quest log was also updated to its current format. The final patch of Warlords of Draenor also gave us time walking, which I think has been pretty universally liked as a bit of content. It gives us a real reason to go back and see old dungeons, especially great for newer players who otherwise may have never got to experience them firsthand when they were current. Add on top of the new various rewards from it, toys, mounts, you have a formula for success I think. All of the vanilla character models were given a much needed brush up, bringing them a bit closer to how modern MMOs should look, whilst still keeping that style that we're so familiar with World of Warcraft. Still not anywhere near the level of customization other MMOs had back then, but it was something. At least Shadowlands looks to be expanding upon this once again. Warlords of Draenor, along with a class pruning, had also vastly changed how PvP worked. Now, if I'm honest, by this point I barely did PvP anymore, so I don't remember it too well, but looking over features for the game, all disarms were moved, all interrupts that had silence effects on them had the silence portion removed, big fan of this change. All crowd control effects in the same category were changed to share the same diminishing return, like stuns or roots. Many CC effects were just straight up removed. Essentially, in Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard wanted you to be able to play your class in PvP, not sit in CC for ages and ages. There was also Ashran, located just next to your faction hub in Draenor, a PvP zone designed around various objectives and capture points. Looking back at posts from the Warlords of Draenor era though, well, you sort of know what to expect with posts on internet forums. Tends not to be good, but this was overwhelmingly not good. Looked like it was a bad time and that Helenka, the PvP director back then, wasn't doing the best of jobs. Moving on from this though, onto arguably my favourite feature of Warlords of Draenor, a feature I didn't realise how much I liked until I started playing Classic. It was in Warlords of Draenor when spell batching was removed. I was very surprised to read this actually. I could have sworn it was done as early as Cataclysm even, but here it is on their own patch notes. This made spells act instantly, not after the 400 MS server loop, and made many features in combat just feel so much more responsive. I've really come to appreciate how vital this is for the game to be enjoyable in all aspects, and I'm hopeful that we can get this tech applied to our legacy servers at some point down the line. So those are most of the features I'd say. There's more, but that's the interesting stuff. Now it's time for us to go on to the negatives. I think that you can summarise them quite easily. There just wasn't much to do. Warlords of Draenor lacked content to keep players busy. It started off fine enough, but take a look at the sub counts and it dropped 3 million in 3 months. A quarter of the player base, by the way, followed by Blizzard no longer publicly reporting their active subscriber count. The first month or so of Warlords of Draenor I would say was actually very enjoyable, but that's the same with any new expansion really, since you have such an enormous amount of front-loaded content. But level 100, as it dragged on, just became more and more disappointing. So it's about time we talked about Garrisons, isn't it? Been waiting for this. This was a huge feature and a big selling point for Warlords of Draenor. People were branding it player housing, and it's probably about as close as we're ever going to get to it. I think people got a bit too imaginative in terms of customizations and how free you would be able to do exactly what you wanted. On the other hand, Blizzard teased more content than ended up going live. Far more, in fact. Where's the dance studio, Blizzard? I'm still waiting. Early on at least, Garrisons were fun. I like going out and farming the blueprints for the upgrades, completing all the mounts in the stables, choosing and fully upgrading everything I wanted, getting every follower and upgrading them, getting them gear, getting all the toys and followers at the inn. There was a whole bunch to look forwards to. It's just that in time it turned out to basically be a quick login mobile game type deal. Get on, have your add-on work out the best setup for your followers, send them out on missions, log off, repeat. If you didn't PvP, there was more or less only raid logging for the entire expansion. And Garrisons ruined the economy really badly. We're still seeing the effects of it today. With many characters at level cap and the correct follower setups, you could rake in thousands of gold a day for literally a couple minutes of logging in. This is not even an exaggeration. It hyperinflated prices on the auction house, as everyone was now running about with more gold than they knew what to do with. On top of this, we had the mining and herb garden. Now, I have no idea who thought giving every single character access to 2 primary gathering professions as a passively generated resource was a good idea, but yeah, log in, collect free stuff, sell free stuff, you get even more gold. You could even, later on in the expansion, get an auction house in your garrison, as well as a portable bank through guild perks. In fact, you never needed to leave your garrison at all, and in 6.2 they added the shipyard, which was just another table you went to and ticked off daily stuff. And by this point everyone had had enough of garrisons, and now this? 6.2, by the way, was the final major content patch. 2 major content patches, 2 for an expansion that dragged on for nearly 2 years. Tanan Jungle was pretty thin on content as well. And it's unfortunate that Garrisons went the way that they did, along the theme of the expansion. It feels like something Blizzard are only ever going to get one chance to get right, and it went along with the other casualties of Warlords of Draenor, I'm afraid. There was also the whole Apexis crystal system about upgrading your gear, and basically made them into mandatory grinds where you'd pick a quest up from your garrison, go out into the world, kill some stuff, repeat it every day. It wasn't particularly interesting, and that's the only real form of daily content that we had, as they made the choice to do away with the majority of daily quests. If you bought Warlords of Draenor, you got a free level 90 boost. I think this ended up being a big reason why so many people were willing to give it a try, at least early on, and Blizzard have done this for each expansion moving forwards. As the levels get higher and higher, the hill starts to look more like a big mountain for a returning player. Imagine having a level 85 by this point and having to go and complete all of the Pandaria content to get up to speed. People would rather just have their character and go. It's just a philosophy behind getting a character in this way. It's pretty un-MMO-like, if that makes sense. You don't learn your class, there's no progression that's taken place, and it's like Blizzard are saying, well, everything beforehand is kind of whatever. What we have at the moment is the good stuff, so just skip all that and give us money. Pathfinder 6.2.2. Right near the end of Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard finally said, fine, you can have flying back, but you're gonna have to work for it. This was the first iteration of the Pathfinder achievement: complete the main quest storyline, complete all main zone stories, find loads of rare items, complete loads of reputations, basically just do everything in the game that it has to offer, and now you can fly. At least it was account-wide. I think it's only with Shadowlands that they're relaxing this restriction in flying with Draenor. This came as a result of a whole lot of feedback from players saying, why have I been collecting all these mounts and dragons for years and years if suddenly I cannot use them? What's the logic behind it? Some people hate flying, some people love it. Whatever you think, it's a bit of a grey area, but the Pathfinder is a method that Blizzard have stuck to in unlocking flying in future expansions. The only thing I wish with it is once an expansion is over, they would just make it a feat of strength and let you be able to buy flying instead of having to go back and do old content. Finally, just the cancelled content. Warlords of Draenor promised so much and Blizzard cut it short. It's clear even by early on in Warlords of Draenor that the team did not have the time or resources to make true on what was initially offered and advertised, and ended up having to give us some sort of bare minimum to keep us going and hold our interest. Karabor, aka the Black Temple as we know it today, was originally planned as the Alliance capital for Draenor, Bladespire Fortress for the Horde over in Frostfire Ridge. Instead we get this little settlement next to Ashran, which we barely ever saw anyway because there was no point leaving your garrison. Then there was Farallon, today's Netherstorm, which was shown on early maps and intended to be part of a later content phase, which was scrapped altogether. An entire zone scrapped. It's such a shame. As I started off in part 1, it's just all kind of disappointing. Warlords of Draenor held massive potential and it started off looking quite good, but it fell flat very soon after. Blizzard never really attempted to get out of the rut that it fell into either. It certainly had its good points, but the negatives put it dead last for many people, and overall the least liked expansion World of Warcraft has ever seen. The notion for Blizzard to cut their losses and plow on with the next expansion, however, turned out to have been the right decision. Even now, I think another expansion that would have a similar reception to Warlords of Draenor would really see them struggle. I mean, people compare BFA to it, but BFA has massively more stuff to do, even if you don't like the content that there is, but we'll talk about more when we get there. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for Warlords of Draenor. It's also my least liked expansion, and the one I played the least, by the way. Doesn't mean it only gave us negatives though. Mythic raiding and spell batching on are especially nice, but we'll have to move on, as we're getting quite close to our current expansion now, and our next journey will take us over to the Broken Isles, as we find out how did Legion change World of Warcraft. If you like what you see, give the video a like and subscribe, as there's plenty more to come. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Take care.